Well, greetings, sports fans, and welcome to another episode of Friday News Review, brought to you here at the Winston Smith Project, where we see all the tricks that Big Brother is up to. And this is Friday News Review for I had to check the calendar, the 11th of April, 2025. So what's been happening in the news today? I feel I have to speak very solemnly on a appalling incident perpetrated yet again by those pigs in uniform, the Israeli Defense Force. That they are everything they purport to be fighting against. They're animals, they're terrorists. Wearing a uniform does not stop you from terrorizing people. In fact, in my books, the soldiers who commit acts of terrorism are worse than the citizens who do it, because as soldiers you're taught and you're trained, you should be part of a professional organization, a professional military who is taught the laws of war. And there are laws, there are rules. There's the Geneva Convention, there's laws protecting non-combatant civilians, and the IDF deliberately targets civilians, deliberately targets non-combatants, and they lie non-stop about it. Sorry, I have to keep having little sippies, otherwise my mouth gets dry. Maybe I'm nervous. Now, what happened on the 23rd of March recently is one of the most heinous acts among many that we have seen in Gaza, where the Israeli army, such as it is, targeted paramedics. Now, I think everyone could agree paramedics are saints, no matter what religion, what background, what country they represent. Anyone who goes into a career as a paramedic or a healthcare professional does it usually with the most noble intent. Their intent is not to be involved in fighting. They don't pick up a gun, they pick up a syringe. They don't put bullets into you, they put antibiotics into you. They inject you with morphine, not lead. And I think in every society, every civilized society, so I guess that counts Israel out, and we'll do a program looking at Israeli society. It's honestly, if Israelis were Muslims, Israel would have been bombed into the Stone Age by America right now, because they would have seen them as they are, a country of religious fanatics continually attacking and slaughtering people around them. Israel wouldn't exist today if it was a Muslim country, and that's an interesting observation to make out. But I think in every civilized society, we regard paramedics as untouchables. You don't harass ambulance crews. You don't, in Australia, like in most countries, when an ambulance comes along the road, everybody moves out of the way. You give room, and you have utmost respect for people in emergency services, whether they be police, firefighters, or particularly paramedics. I think you'd have to say they're considered number one. So what does the IDF do? Well, it targets paramedics and it kills them. And we'll talk a little about that. I want to show you a picture of a young lady. This pretty young lady is pretty young 21-year-old. Her name is Razan Al-Najjar. Hope I've pronounced that right. I always try my best to pronounce names right. I think it's a matter of respect and courtesy. But anyway, Nazar was shot by the IDF. She was a paramedic. She was a nurse, actually. She was in uniform. She was going to help people who were at a protest. Now remember, these are people who aren't armed. They're not firing at the Israeli military. And you'll say, well, hang on, they are. There's all this Hamas stuff going on. I'm talking about a killing which happened on the 1st of June 2018. So all this bullshit, and the reason I've picked out poor Nazar is poor Razan, sorry, my apologies. We keep getting told everything the Israeli military does, which is heinous and which is overlooked and which is allowed to take place, live streaming of genocide. I mean, it's like you took video technology back to Nazi Germany. and filmed what was going on in the concentration camps. And then you wonder why nobody did anything about it. Well, that's what's happening here, folks. It's on your TV, and the footage is available day and night. And the Israeli military are making no secret of it. In fact, they flaunt their war crimes. Videos are all over YouTube, which is many of the pricks have been identified by name, and I hope that one day they're hunted down and forced to face some form of legal justice. Anyway, Paul Razan was shot in 2018, long before any October 7 raid, because everything is justified by October 7. Everything that, not just the Israeli, but the dogs and our politicians in the West, Kunt Starmer and the dogs of politicians here on both sides of Parliament who make excuses about Israel defending itself. Israel has never defended itself. It's attacked nations around it and had to respond to their retaliatory attacks. And also, it has continually subjugated and tried to slaughter an indigenous population. That's not defending itself. There's no justification for that. So let's clear that off the table straight away. But in 2018, at a protest near in Gaza, where the Gazans were protesting about the horrific conditions they are forced to live under by their occupying army, the IDF, Paul Razan was there to help as a nurse, because the Israeli army routinely shoots unarmed protesters. Oh, well, we don't talk about that, do we? October 7, that gives us a right. Bullshit. You've been killing unarmed people for decades in Gaza, and that's why Razan was there. And Razan, that pretty young girl I just showed you, well, have a look at this. This is her mother holding up her shirt, which, as you can clearly see, is a uniform. It's a uniform of the Red Crescent. That is the equivalent of the Red Cross. Obviously, in Muslim countries, the Red Cross is replaced by the Red Crescent. It has exactly the same functions, is recognized exactly the same under international law, so don't be under any illusions. Okay, so to dispel any bias, think of it as she was wearing a Red Cross. It's it's exactly what she was doing. And she was shot, and she was targeted deliberately by the Israeli military. Now, of course, the Israeli military lied, as they do continually. They produced a video. I mean, this is the evil of Zionism. This is how disgusting and debased these so-called humans are. That after they'd shot this young 21-year-old girl, this lovely young lady who was just trying to be a nurse, to try and fucking help people, they doctored a statement by her from a previous interview where it made out that she was acting as a human shield for, who else? Hamas, the get-out-of-jail-free card for every atrocity Israel is ever likely to commit. Of course, the video was debunked because it was later shown to have been completely doctored. They used a portion of the video saying where she tried to act as a shield for sick people, and then they corrupted that, took bits out of context, chopped and changed the video to make it look like she was saying she was a human shield for Hamas. Nice people, those IDF bastards, aren't they? So, the video was debunked, and she had nothing to do with Hamas, and it was proven to be a complete fraud. Now, further to that, a group called B'Tselem, and once again, I do hope I've pronounced that properly, and apologies if I don't. And that's why you'll hear me talk about Zionism in particularly, not so much about Israelis, although there's a lot to be said about Israelis, and certainly not about Jews, because there's a lot to be said about Judaism, which is good. And there are a lot of Jews who protest vehemently against Zionism, vehemently against Israel, and vehemently against the actions of the IDF. So you need to keep them separate. But of course, the Zionists like to try and lump it all together so that anyone like me who is criticizing the IDF is labeled anti-Semitic. Attacking a military force for shooting civilians has nothing to do with religion. It's nothing about being anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish. It's about being a fucking human being, being a decent person. So, B'Tselem is a very important organization because they actively investigate war crimes of the Israeli military. So, that's why I'm saying not all Jews, not all Israelis are Zionists, are evil. And there are some people who believe in the principles of Zionists. So I wouldn't say necessarily evil, but they're misguided because the founding principles, Zionism is a political ideology. It is not religious. It is not racial. It's a politically motivated ideology, espoused by Herzog originally in the 1890s, I believe. I'll get an exact date for you on that. And it's got nothing to do with the decent Israelis and decent Jews around the world. Now, B'Tselem, who are those people? They investigate. And they investigated the killing of poor Razan, and as they investigate all the shootings. And this is I'm going to read to you exactly from B'Tselem's report. So this is not, Bintang Bernie having a go at Israel. This is the Israeli group who look at these incidents. The report says, the IDF spokesperson tried to clear the military of responsibility for al-Najjar's death. Well, of course, nothing new there. Initially saying that soldiers did not fire at the spot where she had been standing. Later, the military said poor old Razan, now they call it al-Najjar here in the report, might have been killed by a ricochet. Oh, really? Okay, but you've just said that the soldiers weren't firing at that spot. So how could there be a ricochet if no one was firing at that spot? Before finally accusing her of serving as a human shield for rioters. Okay, now let's just, before we go on, have a look at that. Now, even if she was a human shield, which we know she wasn't, that's a lie, for rioters. If you're rioting, why do you need human shields? Because somebody's shooting at you. Being shot at for rioting is not normal behavior. Isn't freedom of expression, fundamental in all so-called democracies? So these people were rioting. They weren't fighting. They weren't shooting. They weren't terrorists. They were rioting. So, but but the IDF says, oh, well, she might have been a human shield for those, because basically you're admitting that you routinely shoot at rioters. Contrary to the many versions offered by the military, surprise, surprise, the facts of the case lead to only one conclusion. This is B'Tselem's report, remember. An investigation conducted by B'Tselem proves that 20-year-old al-Najjar, I believe she was actually 21, but was fatally shot by a member of the security forces who was aiming directly at her as she was standing about 25 meters away from the fence, despite the fact that she posed no danger to him or anyone else and was wearing a medical uniform. Let's just read a part of that again. Was fatally shot by a member of the security forces who was aiming directly at her, despite the fact that she posed no danger to him or anyone else. So that's what Israel calls defending itself. That's what our scum politicians support. That's not defending yourself. That's murder. That's shooting at an unarmed woman in a medical uniform. Real heroes, those cunts in the IDF, aren't they? So, back on that, then we have, what happened on the 23rd of March. We had a medical aid convoy travelling through southern Gaza. Now, these people were in clearly marked ambulances, and they were advancing to help colleagues who had been shot at, injured earlier in the fighting. Now, everyone knows the rules of war, Geneva Convention, protect ambulance workers, the Red Cross or Red Crescent. Both of them are protected under the laws of war. Something that the IDF, of course, doesn't pay scant regard to at all times. Now, these 15 paramedics were going along, and they were killed. And of course, the Israeli military said that, they were advancing suspiciously towards our forces with no lights on. Okay, and then of course, as usual, that's debunked. This is a thing that people need to think about when you hear statements from different people. Zelensky's another classic example. When you see organizations or individuals who lie repeatedly, don't you start to question? Don't you start to think? Now, the Israelis lie non-stop, and we have ample evidence of it. I mean, the beheaded babies, 7th of October. Not one baby was beheaded. We know that was a lie. Joe Biden even said he'd seen pictures. I mean, he should have been called on that if we had a proper media. Where are the pictures you claimed you saw, Joe? Because they don't exist. Okay, so how can you stand in public and say you've seen this? You know, the President of the United States, one of the most powerful and influential people in the world, should think about what he fucking says and make sure it's accurate before he announces it to the world. So that was a lie. The allegations of rape. Marie Colonna, the United Nations Special Rapporteur who was sent there to investigate the allegations of rape on October 7th, found zero, none, zilch, no evidence of sexual assault by Hamas fighters on any Israeli. Another lie debunked. So there's two clear, blatant lies, which, you know, are part of Israel's biggest, you know, well, woe is me, we can do what we like. The 7th of October, the big drama that allows us to go and kill civilians, which we know clearly have been debunked as total lies. So, you know, when are we going to start questioning what IDF spokesmen and spokeswomen say? Because it is repeatedly proven to be false. Mm-hmm. As in the same situation with Razan here, where they actually doctored a video clip to make out lies about her and repeatedly lied until their own organisation, Israeli's own organisation, B'Tselem, proved it were lies. So straight away you've got to be suspicious. Why would a bunch of paramedics advance suspiciously towards an armed military force with their lights off? Okay, but then of course we found video in the body, one of the bodies of the ambulance advancing when they were attacked, the convoy, and they all had their lights on. So, okay, lie number one, straight off the bat. Okay, you know, the Israelis have lied yet again. Then the Israelis said, of course, the get out of jail free card, well, Hamas uses ambulances all the time to come close and attack us, and so we have to be very cautious. Hamas, by the way, this is never reported in your so-called media, the propaganda stuff that spills into your head day in, day out. Hamas immediately came out and said, no, we don't. We've never used ambulances for that purpose. And if we have, show us evidence. Find an incidents where Hamas uses ambulances to sneak up on the Israeli military. Of course, the Israeli military, the IDF, refused to respond because there are no incidences. Hamas does not do that. Regardless of what you think of Hamas, this is the thing. Don't be continually clouded by labels like terrorists or Hamas or this or that or Putin. Think for yourself. Find evidence. There is no evidence that Hamas has ever done this. That doesn't mean Hamas are great guys and I'm saying Hamas are wonderful. I'm just saying there is no evidence that they have ever used ambulances to sneak up on the Israeli military. Okay? And I'm saying that that shows that that's Israel's second lie about this incident. Now, Israel then says, you know, they were caught in the crossfire. It was a active war zone. They shouldn't have been there. Okay? Lie number 3. When the bodies were found, okay, one of the paramedics was tied with his hands behind his back. That doesn't exactly sound like you're in the middle of a crossfire, shot accidentally, you know, by incoming shells in the middle of some massive Hamas-inspired firefight, does it? Of course, we know the truth. And it's interesting. I'm going to read to you just a few snippets here from The Guardian, which is mainstream media, but they set themselves up as the guardian of free truth and honest journalism. Sorry, too many ands there. But they are essentially a mainstream media. I'm not a huge fan of The Guardian. They sacked John Pilger, for Christ's sakes, and then they asked me to donate money at the end of the article. Fuck off. However, they have been more honest than most because they report here what the UN has said. Once again, this is the UN. This isn't old crazy Bintang going off here. I'm reading directly from their article. 15 Palestinian paramedics and rescue workers, including at least one United Nations employee, were killed by Israeli forces one by one and buried in a mass grave 8 days ago in southern Gaza. Now, if you have any doubts about this, you know, that not only did they bury the bodies, okay, I'm just scrolling through the article here, okay, what they did was that they buried them and they buried their ambulances in the sand. Now, why would you dig a huge hole with a bulldozer? Remind you, it's not easy to bury a fucking convoy of ambulances and then bury them. Clearly, you're trying to hide the evidence. You're trying to hide the war crime. You know, and we know that it was a war crime because one of the paramedics in the convoy was on a call on his mobile when they were attacked. And this is from Dr. Bashar Murad, who's the Red Crescent's Director of Health Programs. And he said that he informed them that he was injured and requested assistance, and that another person was also injured. So clearly they were fired on, but at least we know at least 2 of them were still alive. A few minutes later during the call, we heard the sound of Israeli soldiers arriving at the location speaking in Hebrew. Oh, okay. The conversation was about gathering the team with statements like, gather them at the wall and bring some restraints to tie them. So these pricks, after shooting up this ambulance convoy, gathered the survivors, put them up against the wall, tied their hands, and then executed them. And this is the military that we're supposed to believe is fighting terrorism. What annoys me once again is, where is 60 Minutes? Where is the Daily Telegraph? Where is Sky News? Why aren't these crimes, and they're hideous, heinous crimes, being investigated? Why hasn't 60 Minutes done an in-depth expose or program on Razan al-Najjar, the 21-year-old girl who was executed by a sniper? Why don't you know about these things? Because I talk to people about stuff like this and they've got no idea. It's hidden from you because of the propaganda machine that we call mainstream media. Now that, imagine if the Russians had done that in Ukraine, and our little liar Zelensky was jumping up and down about it, and this is why we need more guns, more money. The world would be up in arms, and it'd be Putin this, Putin that. Now, I keep hearing about this so-called rules-based order that we're all supposed to abide by. The funny thing is, if you invite me for a game of chess and I'm not sure of the rules, I can look up the rules of chess and I can find them online easily. If you ask me about the shooting of Razan al-Najjar, I can look up the Geneva Convention. I can find quite easily the rules governing the protection of civilians, aid workers, non-combatants in war. I can find those rules quite easily. If you ask me about the upcoming election in Australia and how it works, I can find the rules from the Electoral Commission. Nowhere, funny enough, nowhere can I find any rules about this rules-based order. So I keep banging my microphone. I hope it's not making a noise for you. They don't exist, do they? We keep referring, people like Starmer, that dog in the UK, and the Muppets here, they keep referring to the international rules-based order. Well, where are these rules? I'd like to see a copy. Source document. Whenever you refer to something, go to the source document. Okay, but there is no source document. This is just something that's made up. And people, of course, old Bintang's first law, most people are stupid. They just go along with it. They don't stop and question it. We've just had Benjamin Netanyahu in the United States. Now, the United States champions itself as the forefront of democracy, justice, truth in the American way. Sounding like a Superman ad, aren't I? So if America is so caught up, so endeared to justice, then why, when the International Court of Justice, the ICC, issued an arrest warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu for crimes against humanity for what he's doing in Gaza, why didn't the Americans enforce that warrant? Well, of course, they don't recognize the International Court of Justice, do they? Because it's a little inconvenient. A lot of other countries don't too. Russia doesn't, by the way. So it's, we need to keep a balanced view here. But however, Russia doesn't go on banging on about the international rules-based order, does it? America keeps banging on about how rules must be followed, but then when the rules don't suit America, the rules are conveniently ignored. So I find it laughable that we supposedly are the good guys, we're supposedly the ones setting the standard for the world, when we lie to our people, we break the rules, we ignore the most heinous atrocities that happen. And I mean, I'm taking a specific example of Gaza. The whole issue of Gaza is nothing but a heinous atrocity. I mean, since the latest figures I had was the 4th of March 25, and it shows that 48,408 people have died in Gaza. The vast majority, overwhelming majority, being civilians and a disproportionately high number of women and children against just over 1,700 Israeli soldiers. So, you know, what are we defending here? What are we fighting against? And when you see all this footage coming out of Gaza, and the Israeli military, they're so confident in the fact that they're untouchable, that no one will investigate the hideous crimes they're doing, the support they have, the tacit approval by people like us, countries like Australia, and obviously America's, their support base that wouldn't exist without it. When you see all these videos, there are no dead Hamas fighters everywhere. When you see them firing their weapons, the Israelis, there's no one firing back. So where are all these Hamas fighters that every atrocity, every civilian killed was a Hamas human shield? I don't see any Hamas bodies lying around. I don't see any Israelis under sustained fire from Hamas fighters. All I see is a bunch of pigs firing into buildings that are or were occupied by civilians. That's all I see. Utterly disgusting. And we ignore it and we allow it to go on. So we're all guilty of crimes. And all this bullshit about rules-based order, well, you can shove that up your ass because it doesn't exist. There are no rules. And the one danger that we have to confront, and the one thing that I think is the biggest danger, the biggest fear that we have, we've got this idiot Richard Marles keeps going on about China here, and, we're talking about Russia, and Putin wants to invade all of Europe and rebuild the Soviet Union. Yeah, right. The biggest fear, the biggest danger in the Western world is insidious, as real danger always is. It's subtle. It's under the surface. You don't see it. It doesn't come at you with a Chinese soldier armed with an AK-47. It sneaks up behind in your own country. And it is Zionism, ladies and gentlemen. Zionism is the biggest danger the Western world faces because the Zionists have insidiously slid their way in. They've ingratiated themselves into the Western countries and the Western democracies, and they now control it. Speaking out against atrocities like what I've just discussed is being labelled anti-Semitic, and you can be charged and fined and imprisoned for it in certain countries. We can't make simple hand gestures anymore. Okay, that's, people are being arrested for so-called anti-Semitism. There is no anti-Semitism. Okay, there is protests against genocide, killing, and hideous actions by the most terrible state on the planet, which is Israel. That's what people are protesting against. There is no anti-Semitism. Jews aren't being persecuted. They were. I have utmost horror at what happened during World War II. It's disgusting. The industrialization of killing targeted largely at Jews. But one thing that annoys me about the so-called Holocaust is it deliberately excludes the 5.5 million non-Jews who were killed in that heinous act by the Nazi regime. However, yes, Jews were targeted and they needed to be protected. And we did. See, here's the kicker, ladies and gentlemen. My parents and many of your parents went, hundreds of thousands, millions of people went and fought to stop the persecution of Jews, to free them from Nazi tyranny. And we did. In 1946, there were no more death camps in Europe. So this claim that these people needed a homeland is bullshit. We went over there and we fought and we rescued them and we saved them from that hideous atrocity that was being perpetrated against them, okay, as a religious group, as an ethno-religious group. They had no reason after that to leave Europe. They should have stayed there. And instead, what happened? The poor old Palestinians are getting slaughtered by a bunch of European blow-ins who just suddenly decided they want to take over their country because they needed a homeland. No, they didn't. Religions don't need homelands. There's no country called Muslim. There's no country called Catholic, Italy is a separate country. Even the Vatican State is not necessarily defined as a Catholics only area. Non-Catholics are free to go there. So this lie that somehow Israel is a necessity for the Jewish people is, once again, it's another lie. It's another incitement of Zionism to fool you and to justify some of the most atrocious horrors and the subjugation, a slaughter, and attempted ethnic cleansing and genocide of an indigenous population. Something that I would like to think was a relic of the past. But sadly, Nazism is alive and well in modern day Israel. Anyway, this has been Tam Burning. I hope I've depressed you enough with that. And we'll try and talk about something a little less depressing next week. We'll talk about the election maybe in Australia. That's always uplifting because it's always comical. Yes. Pauline Hanson's daughter's going to run. One neuron continues on as a generational issue. That's going to be fun to talk about. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, and others, thanks for tuning in. And we'll see both of you next week.